Hi, welcome to the lecture on India. My name is Dr. Michael Bardot, and in case for those who have been following along in these lectures, I did want to point out, before I get any questions, that we have had a different backdrop. We've changed our recording studios, so for the next few lectures, we'll actually be in this recording studio. Now, if we take a look at India in terms of the ancient and medieval world, we first take a look at the maps. Now, the area of India, as we can see here, is extremely large. In terms of ancient and medieval India, it was actually larger than the modern-day countries of India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, and Burma. So basically, in the ancient medieval world, all of this area would have been considered India. It has a few major river systems. We have the Indus River Valley to the north. We have the Ganges River Valley system in the eastern portion of India, and then we have some minor rivers located throughout the India proper. When we take a look at India in terms of its civilization, what we see its Neolithic revolution taking place approximately in the 6th millennial BCE, and that Neolithic period lasted for approximately about 4,000 years. However, as civilization and the population of India began to get larger and more complex, we see our first civilization in India. It's called the Indus civilization, approximately about 2600 BCE. The civilization would last approximately about 700 years, from 2600 to 1900 BCE, plus or minus 100 years. Unfortunately, we don't know a lot about this civilization, primarily because of the fact that its language has continued to be somewhat mysterious, and we haven't been able to fully translate it. We can tell some things based on archaeological evidence. We figure that one of the capital cities was Mohenjo-daro. We estimate that at its height, the population was about 40,000 people. Based on the material culture produced, we know that it was a farming-based economy, which did have limited trade with both Mesopotamia and Egyptian civilizations. As I mentioned earlier, the linguistic nature of the Indus River Valley is somewhat mysterious. We know that it has a Dravidian origins and that it was predominantly a coherent language, but we believe it was mostly pictographical, and because of that, we have been unable to fully decipher it. We don't know, as I said, much. Little concrete information is known, but we do know approximately about 1900, and for about 200 years, the decline began to settle in, and we begin to see urban abandonment and a lack or a loss of population. That leads us to the 1900s in terms of when that decline first started. And what we see is a migration of peoples either in or emerging in terms of the social system. Excuse me. We call this the Aryan migration. Prior to probably about 50 or 40 years ago, it was believed that this was a completely new integration of people in terms of the population we call the Indo-Europeans. But recently, in past the last 2 decades, there's been additional archaeological research and evidence pointing to the fact that the migration might not have been as substantial or as concerted or concentrated as what we thought previously. Be that as it may, what we do notice in terms of beginning in 1900 and extending for about 900 years through the breakup of the Indus civilization is what we notice. We do notice a cultural shift and a cultural change. Because of that, we designate particularly the 1700s to the year about 1000 as the early Vedic age. And just to kind of briefly summarize what occurred, we do see an influx or an emergence of a group of people referred to as the Aryans, which produced a shift in culture and the introduction or elevation of a particular livestock animal known as the cow, or as we collectively call them, cattle. We see the introduction of a new phonetic alphabet known as Proto-Sanskrit, which over time would evolve into the basic language of India today, which is Sanskrit. We also see the beginnings of social stratification, with the leading class being designated as the Brahmins. Our religion continued to evolve and change over this time period, evolving into a more consistent polytheistic religion, which is commonly referred to as the Vedic tradition, hence the name Early Vedic Age, and it's based upon religious documents called the Rig Veda. In terms of our economic production, economy and such, agriculture production was still the main facet of our economic produce, as well as minor trade routes, both with Asia and also with the Middle East and the Mediterranean. What we begin to see in terms of our political development is a continuation of a more regional style of government, with regional kingdoms, regional princes controlling fairly small but distinct areas, banding together and primarily making war upon one another. That evolution continued over the course of that 900 years, from 1900 to 1000. And by the year 1000, historians draw a distinction between the early Vedic age and the later Vedic age. And this later Vedic age is when we're going to see the solidification of a lot of facets that would become the cornerstones of Indian society. First and foremost, we see the solidification of what we call a caste system. For those of you who don't know, a caste system is basically an extremely rigid class system. It's a class system based upon birth. And so there's no mobile ability, there's no ability to move from one caste to another. We consider this year 1600 to being a golden age of that Vedic tradition, but we also see near the tail end of that period, from approximately 800 to 600 BCE, we see the rise of, or the coming together of several different elements of Vedic tradition, which would create what we call Hinduism, which would become the primary religion of India, even to this day. The stabilization of culture through this caste system continued to kind of settle in, and Indian civilization kind of continued on a slow but methodical path towards centralization in terms of those cultural traits. Now, the date 600, to kind of end the, quote, Vedic age of civilization, comes around the year 600. And the reason why that year is designated is we're going to actually see a difference in terms of religious tradition. And that difference is, of course, the emergence of Hinduism, as well as the emergence of several other basic non-Vedic religious traditions. So by and large, our predominant religion is going to be Hinduism. It's going to emerge out of that Vedic tradition. And one of the primary concepts of Hinduism is going to be the concept of karma, called Brahmana in Sanskrit. Now, a lot of people might know what karma is, but according to the Hinduistic tradition, karma is the belief that there's a cosmic calculator, if you will, that's going to calculate everybody's good and evil deeds. And over time, over the course of your life, that karma, as we say, will build up, whether it be good karma in the form of a tally or a final counting of positive deeds over evil deeds, or bad karma, in which those evil deeds will outweigh or outnumber the good deeds. And because of that, then the idea of basically reincarnation emerged in Hinduism to kind of explain why that karmic balance is maintained. At the end of one's life, according to Hinduism, then that tally, that counting of positive and evil deeds will then emerge and will designate what happens to your life or your afterlife in terms of the next stage. According to Hinduistic tradition, if you have a positive karmatic balance, you will then ascend the chain of being, which means if you were in a caste system of a lower caste, you will then move up possibly one or two castes. But if you have a negative balance, you will then move down a caste. Now, if you are already the lowest caste, which is called the untouchable caste, then you will basically move out of humanity down into the animal kingdom, going all the way down so far as to possibly being designated or being reborn, if you will, as an insect. Now, once you're reborn at the bottom of the chain of life, then you have nowhere to go really but up. And so you would basically spend an eternity being reborn up and down in terms of the karmic level. Now, because of that, there's some debate among ascetic Hinduistic traditions in terms of what necessarily happens when you have achieved the highest level of the chain of being a Brahmana. And then what happens if you live a good karmic life and you move to the next level? What would that next level be? Some traditions argue that it is a movement into the reign of godhood, while others argue that it's a move into being basically one with the universe and ceasing to be reborn. That's getting back to that date of 600. We date that, of course, to the dating of the recording of a religious document called the Upanishads. Now, the Rig Veda, which we've mentioned, those predate the year 600, and they are very different in terms of tone and tradition and meaning, as opposed to the Upanishads, which is considered to be the first religious document of Hinduism. However, the emergence of Hinduism was not the only religious change to take place. We had the beginnings of what is called yoga as a religious tradition. Contrary to what a lot of people might know about yoga, which is today kind of been stripped of its religiosity and made into an exercise, the idea behind yoga religiously was to contort the body, to stretch it into different positions in order to achieve spiritual enlightenment. We also have the emergence of two non-traditional, non-Vedic religions known as Jainism, which is centered around the principle of ahimsa in Sanskrit, which means non-violence. And we also have the emergence of what is called Buddhism. Jainism is by far the lesser in terms of number of the two religions, basically occupying an extremely small sect in terms of the Indian population today. Very simply put, Jainism is an absolute dedication, if you achieve, quote, perfection, it's an absolute dedication to the idea of nonviolence. Going so far, as is the example of the great Jain, going so far as to not perform or to perpetuate violence against any living thing, including animals and plants. The heroic, if you will, story of Jain is that he had eventually achieved perfection, eating nothing and dying of starvation. It's a very, very stringent religion, to say the least. Buddhism, on the other hand, is a religion that started out of the life and teachings of an individual by the name of Siddhartha Gautama, otherwise called the Buddha, which means enlightened one. Buddhism started out as a religious idea based upon the principle of meditation, trying to achieve a spiritual oneness with the universe that is commonly referred to as nirvana. This enlightened state of nirvana, then, is the goal of Buddhism, but the catch is that once one achieves nirvana, the body and the mind cannot remain in that state indefinitely. And so a Buddhist would spend their entire life achieving nirvana and then basically trying to re-achieve nirvana throughout the course of their lives through different forms of meditation. And the key to Buddhism is that it is extremely fluid and that it can merge with a lot of different other religious traditions, and that there's no one set way that kind of requires a particular meditational style. And because of that, Buddhism is going to spread quite rapidly into the Asian world because of its very kind of amorphous or undefined nature, which allows it to embrace other religious traditions. And if we take a look at the map of the spread of Buddhism, that is pretty clearly seen. Buddhism started here, and it spread to the east, it spread to the south, it spread throughout Malaysia, and then into China, all the way up into Korea and to the coastal areas. But one thing you will notice is that the spread of Buddhism in terms of the ancient and medieval world, it was very simply located in the Eastern world. It did not spread west. And that is primarily because of the nature of the religious traditions, both in the Middle East and in Egypt. And later on, if we're looking at the year 323 or basically 300, basically upon the rise of Judaism and the nature of the religious traditions of the West. This statue, I have this statue in here to give an indication. Buddhism, that is a statue of Buddha, which might differ very greatly from your mental picture of what Buddha represented or what Buddha looked like. If you happen to see a picture of Buddha being larger, kind of older and bald, that would be a Buddha statue from a more Asian or from a Chinese-based culture. And the reason for that is pretty simple. In terms of the Chinese culture, as we mentioned, age and size in terms of girth became symbols of wisdom. And so the enlightened Buddha must have been large and older because of his great wisdom. This statue predominantly comes from Southeast Asia, primarily in the Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam area, which is a little more has different cultural principles about youth as being wise, youths being wise, as well as being the heads of different religious segments here. That kind of sums up Buddhism. Like I say, it's very fluid, and it kind of, as a religious tradition, kind of contrary to what we've studied before, it kind of takes on a lot of different cultural traits. Now, politically, in terms of the political history of India, we've talked a lot about religion, and that's the reason for that is pretty simple. Politically speaking, India continued to remain, for most of its history, a more regional-based, decentralized government system. The exception of that, however, comes in the form of what is called the Mauryan Empire, which came together approximately about 320 BCE to about the year 185. Now, unfortunately, though, we have to take this political development with a contextual degree of interest, because we do know that when we get to the Greek lectures, we know that the Indians first came into contact with a centralized political system in the form of an empire, in the case of Alexander the Great, who conquered part of Pakistan in the 320s. And we believe that because of this cultural exchange in terms of example, that the Mauryan Empire might have been a attempt of the Indian civilization to kind of recreate and create a more centralized political structure that was not necessarily culturally normal or culturally inherent within this region. Be that as it may, because of the fragmentation of Alexander the Great's empire, we have the emergence of Chandragupta Maurya and the recreation of a more concentrated empire in the form of the Mauryan Empire. Just to give you an idea, this map represents the size of the Mauryan Empire, which you can see was extremely large. However, despite the success that Chandragupta Maurya had in building the empire, the life of the empire was fairly short, as you can see, lasting approximately about 3 generations. The last great emperor, or if you will, leader of the Mauryan Empire, was the grandson of Chandragupta Maurya, known as Ashoka Maurya. And his death in basically the 190s led to eventually the political decline and subsequent fragmentation of the Mauryan Empire into, once again, those regional kingdoms, which would dominate the history of India for the next about, give or take, 500 to 600 years and beyond. Getting back to religion, which seems to be our kind of focal point for this lecture, Hinduism continued to emerge and kind of evolve over the course of centuries. The Upanishads are one of the great documents. It's the first document of the Hinduistic tradition, but we have the creation of what are called the Hindi epics, known as the Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and the Ramayana, which all helped to kind of further this intellectual and religious evolution of Hinduism and to provide a framework to kind of explain the nature of the polytheistic religious system of Hinduism coupled with a continuation ideology of morality and this karma piece of the religion as well. Just to kind of finish the story of India, this lecture, and to kind of sum up this lecture, in the aftermath of the Mauryan Empire's collapse, we have the rise of regional empires known as the Sangam period, the Shunga Empire in the northeast, and then the creation of the Tamil kingdoms in the south and southeast, which would basically kind of continue to follow a more decentralized, non-universal government political system tract, which basically defined the political nature of India all the way up until about, give or take, the later medieval period. From that point forward, India's history would then be impacted by outside peoples. We have the expansion of the Mongol people and the creation of Mongol dynasties in the upper reaches of India and Asia. And then, of course, we have the creation of what's called the eventual creation of what's called the Mughal Empire, which was an Islamic-based empire, which would control India all the way up until the dawning of the modern Indian period. We didn't mention a whole lot about gods and goddesses of Hindu tradition. There are many. On this slide, I have basically located some statues for you of Kali, known as the goddess of chaos, the goddess of war, and the goddess of death. We have Shiva, Shiva, the goddess of fertility, and Vishnu, goddess of fertility, the god of fertility. One thing I would point out as a religious cultural trait, most of the deities of India are represented as being supernatural, superhuman, in the fact that they will have multiple sensory organs, whether that be multiple limbs in the case of hands or legs, multiple eyes in the case of basically having the ability to see the future, multiple nostrils to accentuate a more pronounced sense of smell, or multiple ears, multiple eyes, tongues, etc. And all of that kind of relates to this belief that the gods were more than human because they had more of the five senses. That kind of summarizes a very brief discussion of India. There's definitely a lot more we could have discussed, but I try to keep the podcast lectures down to about 20 to 25 minutes. And so we'll go ahead and close the book of India for now, and we possibly will address India in later lectures if we have the ability. Thank you again for listening to this lecture. My name is Dr. Michael Bardot on behalf of Lincoln University, and once again I say thank you, and I look forward to speaking to you again.